Emily never expected a single knock on her front door to change the rhythm of her quiet life in Maple Ridge. Yet the moment she heard it, something in her chest reacted before her thoughts could catch up. Because the truth was simple even if she didn't want to admit it. She had been moving through her days like someone walking underwater, slow, heavy, distant from everything including herself, and that door knock felt like a tiny pulse of energy she had not felt in a long time. When she opened the door, the autumn air rushed in along with the sight of Jake, the young delivery driver who always wore a warm, almost shy smile, and even though she had seen him before while handing off packages, this time felt different. Not because he looked different but because she felt different inside. Maybe because that morning her husband Daniel had rushed out without even noticing she looked tired, or maybe because the loneliness she had carried for years was building to a point she couldn't ignore. Jake handed her the heavy box and immediately noticed she was struggling with it, offering help without hesitation, and Emily allowed him to step inside because it felt natural, not dangerous, not wrong, just a kind person helping another. But as he carried the box to the table and she watched the easy kindness in the way he moved, she felt a strange ache deep inside her, a reminder of how long it had been since someone had looked at her with simple attention. After Jake left and she closed the door, she stood there for a moment longer than she meant to, thinking about how kindness could feel like sunlight after a long winter. But she pushed the thought away because she didn't want to think about anything that might pull her toward a place she knew she shouldn't go. The day moved forward until her car refused to start just when she needed to get into town, and as she stood outside staring at her useless engine, frustration built so fast it almost made her eyes sting. It had been months since Daniel helped with anything around the house, months since they talked about anything real, months since she felt like someone's partner instead of someone's roommate, and the weight of it pressed down harder than she liked to admit. So when Jake happened to drive by again, slowing down when he saw her standing beside the stalled car, she felt a quick rush of relief. He rolled down the window, concern already showing in his face, asking if everything was all right, and after a moment of hesitation she told him the truth, that she needed to get to town and her car refused to cooperate. He offered her a ride without even thinking twice, and though her heart fluttered with nerves she couldn't fully explain, she accepted, telling herself it was harmless and practical, nothing more. As she stepped up into the tall delivery van, she grabbed the handle by the door but still needed to lift herself higher, and her legs stretched wider than she intended as she climbed inside. Making her feel unexpectedly self-conscious, Jake steadied her lightly with one hand to make sure she didn't slip, and the brief touch sent a surprising warmth through her, not because it was romantic or inappropriate, but because human contact had become rare in her life, rare enough that even a polite gesture could send a ripple through her emotions. Once she settled into the seat, she tried to compose herself, keeping her hands folded and her eyes focused on the passing scenery as Jake began to drive. The silence stretched for a moment, not awkward but noticeable, as if both of them were aware that something subtle had shifted even though neither dared name it. The van moved through Maple Ridge quickly, past the familiar streets and quiet shops, and Emily felt the air inside grow thick with unspoken thoughts she didn't know how to handle. She tried to remind herself that she was a married woman and Jake was simply being helpful, but her mind kept drifting to the hollow feeling she carried at home, the way Daniel barely looked at her anymore, the way she felt invisible. Even when they sat in the same room, she hated how easy it was to feel noticed by someone who simply offered her genuine attention, and she hated even more how good that attention felt. As they drove, Jake kept glancing her way, not in a bold or intrusive way, but with a quiet awareness, as if he could sense she needed space yet also sensed she might need someone to acknowledge her existence. After a few minutes, he finally spoke, telling her she looked like she'd had a rough morning, and, though the words were simple, they pierced through her defenses because Daniel hadn't asked her a question like that in years. Emily tried to push out a casual laugh and say she was fine, but her voice cracked slightly in a way she hoped he didn't notice. She didn't want to spill her heart to a stranger, or even to someone who felt strangely safe, but the fragility inside her made it harder and harder to pretend she was okay. The van turned down a quieter road that cut through a row of tall maple trees glowing orange and red, creating a tunnel of autumn light that somehow made everything feel even more intimate, and Emily felt something inside her chest slowly opening, something she had kept tightly shut for so long that even the smallest breeze of connection made it tremble. Jake continued driving with calm focus, his presence steady, not pushing, not asking for anything. And maybe that was why Emily couldn't shake the sense that this moment mattered. Not in a dramatic or forbidden way, but in a human way, like a reminder that she was still someone worth noticing, worth caring for. worth listening to. As the road curved, she caught her reflection in the window, realizing how tired she looked, how sad her eyes had become, and the realization struck harder when she understood that Jake, someone who barely knew her, had noticed her sadness before her own husband did. That thought alone made her chest tighten. Not with attraction but with grief for the marriage she once believed would be full of warmth and shared dreams, grief for the version of herself who used to feel confident and cherished, grief for the simple truth that she had become a stranger in her own life. The van slowed as they entered the edge of town, and Emily felt her heartbeat quicken for reasons she couldn't fully explain. She wasn't afraid of Jake, and she wasn't planning anything reckless, but she was afraid of facing the truth that the emotional emptiness in her life had grown so large that even a brief moment with a kind stranger felt like a lifeline. She knew this was dangerous, not because of anything Jake did, but because of what she felt, the stirring of something she shouldn't feel, the awareness of her own longing for connection, understanding and warmth. When Jake asked if she wanted him to drop her directly at the store or somewhere else, she hesitated, not because the destination mattered, but because a part of her didn't want the ride to end. She felt guilty even thinking that, yet the feeling anchored itself inside her, reminding her that her heart was more fragile than she wanted to admit. When she stepped out of the van, she thanked him, her voice softer than she intended, and for a moment they held each other's gaze, a quiet moment filled with something unspoken, not romantic, not inappropriate, just human, like two souls recognizing each other's loneliness for a brief second. As Jake drove away, Emily stood on the sidewalk feeling disoriented by how something so simple could stir so much inside her, and she knew with a sinking feeling that the ride had not just been a ride. It was the beginning of a shift she didn't know how to control, a moment that spread open not her body, but her hidden emotions, the ones she had locked away for too long. And though she didn't know what would happen next, she knew one thing for certain: the loneliness she had ignored for years had finally been noticed, and the person who noticed it wasn't her husband, but the delivery guy with kind eyes who had unknowingly stepped right into the quiet ache of her life. Jake kept his eyes on the road as the town buildings faded behind them and the quiet, winding path along the river came into view, and Emily felt every second stretch like a pull inside her chest, not because anything dramatic was happening but because everything felt too real, too honest, and she wasn't used to honesty anymore, not from her husband, not from herself, and not from the life she had been pretending to keep together. The silence in the van wasn't heavy, it was the kind that made emotions rise without warning, and Emily could feel her heart thudding, not with excitement but with the pressure of things she had kept hidden for far too long. Jake finally asked if she was okay, his voice soft, careful, almost afraid to disturb the fragile space between them, and something about that simple question cracked open the part of her she had tried to protect for years. She looked out the window, watching the river reflect the gray sky, trying to hold herself together, but the truth kept pushing at her, because she was tired of feeling invisible and tired of pretending everything was fine. She whispered that she was dealing with some things at home, and Jake didn't pry or push, he only nodded gently, telling her he understood that life wasn't always easy, and somehow that small understanding carried more weight than any long conversation she'd had with Daniel in years. Jake pulled the van into a quiet overlook where the river curved around a cluster of pine trees, a peaceful place Emily didn't know existed, and he turned off the engine but didn't turn toward her right away, giving her space to breathe, space to decide whether she wanted to speak or stay silent. Emily stared at her hands, twisting her fingers unconsciously, feeling the air inside the van shift with the growing tension. Not romantic tension but emotional tension, the kind that comes when someone sees you more clearly than you want them to, Jake finally said. She didn't have to tell him anything she wasn't ready to share, and the sincerity in his words hit her harder than she expected, because it had been years since someone gave her permission to feel whatever she was feeling without judgment. Emily took a deep breath and let out the truth in short, shaky pieces, telling him her marriage had not been a real marriage for a long time, telling him about the silence at home, the distance that kept growing, the feeling of becoming a shadow in her own life. She didn't tell him everything. She didn't mention the nights she cried quietly in the bathroom so Daniel wouldn't hear, or the way she practiced smiling in the mirror so she wouldn't look broken in public, but she told him enough for him to understand. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression soft, worried, respectful, and the way he listened made her heart twist because it had been so long since someone actually cared about how she felt. When she finally stopped talking, the van filled with a heavy quietness, not uncomfortable but full of raw truth, and Jake whispered that she deserved better than to feel alone in her own home. Those words nearly shattered her, because she had always told herself she didn't deserve more, that she had to accept what her marriage had become, but hearing someone say it out loud made her realize how much she needed to hear it. She looked up and met his eyes, and for a moment something deep and aching passed between them, something that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with being seen, understood, accepted. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and for the briefest moment she felt the pull toward him, a warm, frightening pull that made her want to lean closer, not for anything physical but for connection, for comfort, for the feeling of not being alone for once. But as soon as the feeling rose, guilt rushed in behind it like a cold wave, snapping her back to reality, reminding her that no matter how far her marriage had fallen, she was still married, still tied to vows she once meant. With her whole heart, she pulled back, whispering that she shouldn't be there, shouldn't be confiding in someone who wasn't her husband, shouldn't let her emotions run toward something that didn't belong to her. Jake didn't argue, didn't reach for her, didn't try to change her mind. He only nodded slowly, telling her he understood, telling her he had no intention of taking advantage of her pain, and his quiet respect made the conflict in her chest even harder to bear. The van rolled back onto the road and Emily stared ahead, trying to calm the storm inside her, but every mile they drove seemed to sharpen the truth she had been avoiding, that she was starving for emotional connection, for someone to hear her, see her, care for her, and she hated that she had found it in the one person she was never supposed to turn toward. She told herself that nothing had happened, that nothing would happen, but her thoughts kept circling the same hard truth, that the reason this moment felt so dangerous wasn't because Jake did anything wrong, but because she felt something she wasn't supposed to feel, something she hadn't felt in years, something she missed more than she wanted to admit. As they reached the edge of her neighborhood, Emily felt a tightness in her chest, because part of her didn't want the ride to end, didn't want to go back into the house where her loneliness lived, didn't want to step back into a silence she had been drowning in for years. But she knew she had to. She knew this moment with Jake had been a brief escape, a breath of air she desperately needed, and nothing more. When the van came to a stop in front of her house, she hesitated before opening the door, staring at her front porch like it was the entrance to a life she wasn't sure she could keep pretending to love. Jake looked at her with understanding in his eyes, and she felt tears sting her eyelids because he didn't ask her to stay, didn't ask her to choose anything other than what was right. He only said, "You're stronger than you think." And those words landed so deeply inside her that she felt them echo long after she stepped out of the van. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and Emily stood there watching the van drive away, feeling the emotional weight of everything she had confessed, everything she had felt, everything she now had to face. She walked inside her house and leaned against the door, letting out a breath she had been holding for years, and in that breath was fear, longing, guilt, and a quiet realization she couldn't ignore. Something had shifted inside her, something she couldn't put back the way it was. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew she couldn't keep living in the silence that had consumed her for so long. She knew she had to confront the truth of her marriage, the truth of her loneliness, the truth of her heart, and she knew that the conversation with Jake had not created those truths. It had only revealed them, forcing her to see what she had been avoiding, forcing her to face the reality that her heart had been reopening in ways she didn't understand, ways she wasn't prepared for. As she walked deeper into the quiet house, the echo of Jake's words followed her, soft but steady, like a small guiding light through the emotional darkness she had been living in. And Emily realized that no matter what happened next, her life had already begun to change, not because of anything dramatic, but because for the first time in years she finally knew what she needed to confront, what she needed to heal, and what she needed to feel whole again. The next morning Emily stood by her living room window with a cup of lukewarm coffee she forgot to drink, staring at the street where Jake's delivery van passed almost every weekday, and she felt a strange mix of anxiety and clarity swirling inside her, because everything that happened yesterday had pulled her heart toward a truth she had avoided for years, and now there was no way to hide from it anymore. Her house was quiet in that heavy way that reminded her of all the conversations she and Daniel never had, all the moments they let slip away, all the feelings they buried under routine and politeness, and Emily felt herself trembling because she finally knew that she could not keep living in silence just to keep the peace. As the minutes passed, she watched cars go by, each one stirring a tiny hope that maybe Jake would drive past, not because she wanted anything to happen but because his presence had shown her the depth of her own emptiness, and the truth was she needed that reminder to face what was waiting inside her home. When Jake's van finally appeared at the end of the street, Emily felt her heartbeat lift for a moment before dropping again when she realized he wasn't slowing down, wasn't stopping, wasn't looking her way. He was simply driving his route like any other day, and that simple act of giving her space made her see the situation more clearly than ever before. Jake wasn't trying to pull her into anything, he wasn't trying to cross a line, he wasn't trying to take advantage of her pain. He had shown her kindness and respect, and now he was stepping back to let her choose the direction of her own life. That unexpected respect hit her harder than any romantic gesture could have, because it reminded her of what she had been missing for years, being treated like someone whose feelings mattered, someone who deserved honesty, someone worth listening to, and that realization lit something inside her that she hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet determination to finally say the things she had kept buried for far too long. She spent the rest of the morning pacing through the kitchen, rehearsing words she wasn't sure she could say, imagining every possible outcome, feeling her hands shake as she accepted that no matter how difficult the conversation would be, it needed to happen, because if she didn't speak now, she would keep sinking deeper into a life that no longer felt like her own. When Daniel came home from work earlier than usual, looking tired and distracted as always, Emily felt her breath catch. Because she knew she couldn't delay the truth any longer, she asked him to sit down at the kitchen table, the same table where they used to laugh, the same table where silence eventually replaced affection, and as he sat down across from her, confusion flickering in his eyes, Emily gathered every piece of courage she had left. She told him everything. Not about Jake, not about the moment in the van, not about the emotional spark she felt with a stranger, but about the distance that had grown between them, the loneliness that lived in every room of the house, the way her heart had been slowly dimming without either of them noticing. She told him she felt invisible, unheard, lost inside a marriage that no longer felt alive, and the words came out trembling but truthful, the kind of truth that has been waiting years to be spoken. Daniel's face shifted from confusion to shock to a kind of fear she had never seen in him before, and for a moment he didn't say anything, just stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time in years. He asked why she hadn't told him sooner, why she had carried all of this alone, why she had let the distance grow without saying anything, and she told him the quiet truth she had been hiding. She didn't speak up because she didn't think he would listen, didn't think he would care, didn't think anything would change. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his eyes, and for a long moment he said nothing, and the silence felt terrifying. But then something inside him seemed to break open, because when he finally spoke, his voice shook with guilt, regret, and a kind of pain she hadn't expected. He admitted he had been distant, wrapped up in work and stress and the fear of failing at things he didn't know how to fix. He admitted he avoided conversations because he didn't know what to say. He admitted he loved her but had stopped showing it because he thought she didn't need it anymore. And for the first time in years, Emily felt them standing on the same emotional ground instead of opposite sides of a growing divide. They talked for a long time, not perfectly, not smoothly, but honestly, rawly, the way people talk when they realize the foundation they built their life on needs repair before it collapses completely. Emily cried, Daniel cried, and neither of them pretended everything could be fixed overnight, but they both agreed that they wanted to try. Truly try, not out of habit or obligation but out of the simple truth that they still cared enough to fight for each other. Over the next few weeks the change in their home was small but real, little shifts that meant everything. Daniel asking how her day was, Emily sharing her thoughts instead of hiding them, both of them making an effort to reconnect with the softness they had lost over the years. And though the path wasn't perfect, Emily felt something in her heart slowly settling, like a storm that had finally begun to calm, allowing her to breathe again. One chilly November afternoon, while picking up groceries, Emily turned the corner of an aisle and froze when she saw Jake standing there sorting packages into his handheld scanner. He looked up, surprised but smiling in a warm, gentle way that held no expectations, no awkwardness, no lingering tension, only kindness. Emily walked over, feeling a small flutter of nerves, not from attraction but from gratitude because Jake had unknowingly helped her step into a truth she had been afraid to face. She thanked him, simply, honestly, telling him that his kindness had helped her see what she needed to fix in her life, and Jake nodded, understanding without needing details, telling her he was glad she was doing better, glad she had found her path again, glad she had chosen what felt right for her heart. They said goodbye with an easy, respectful warmth, two people whose lives had intersected at exactly the right time, not to become lovers but to help each other see something they needed to see. As Emily walked out of the store, Holding her bag of groceries and feeling the cold air touch her face, she realized that the ache she once carried was no longer consuming her, because she had faced the truth instead of running from it, and the strength she had found in that moment came not from falling for someone new, but from rediscovering the courage to rebuild what she already had. She drove home to Daniel with a heart that felt lighter, steadier, and more open, knowing that love wasn't always dramatic or perfect. Sometimes it was about choosing to stay, choosing to fight, choosing to speak up before the silence swallowed everything. And Emily understood now that the connection she felt with Jake had not been a temptation but a reminder. A reminder that she deserved to feel valued. A reminder that she needed to heal. A reminder that love only grows when both people decide to nurture it again. As she stepped back into her home, she felt a soft hope blooming inside her, fragile but real, and she knew that her journey wasn't about infidelity or escape or forbidden feelings. It was about finding the courage to reclaim her own happiness and rebuild the relationship she had once believed in. And sometimes, she realized, the person who briefly enters your life doesn't stay, but they change you in a way that lasts forever, reminding you of the love you're still capable of giving, and the love you still deserve to receive.